Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We're about to embark on a really fascinating journey into the legal framework of our freedoms. We talk a lot about rights in our day-to-day lives, but how often do we actually stop to unpack what that means on a structural level? Today, we are going to break down the origins, the global standards, and the strict constitutional laws that actually protect you. But before we get bogged down in all the legal jargon, I want you to genuinely think about this for a second. What would life actually be like without rights? Imagine a world where there are zero guaranteed protections for your thoughts, your property, or even your physical safety. It's a pretty terrifying concept, right? Understanding our rights isn't just something for lawyers to worry about, it's literally the foundation of how we exist together in society. Okay, let's dive into the roadmap for today. First, we'll define our rights, then look at the Universal Declaration, before exploring what fundamental rights actually are. Finally, we'll examine the nature of the rules and the absolutely vital limits of freedom. Starting right at the top with Section 1, defining our rights. Because before a right ever makes it into a constitution, it starts out as a basic human claim. So what are they? Basically, rights are the claims an individual makes on an authority. But they're way more than just legal paperwork. They represent the conditions of social life that are absolutely essential for you to be your best self. As human beings, we're both biological animals and sociological entities. Without rights, we just can't achieve a dignified human existence or properly develop who we are. Think of them as the soil in which our human potential actually grows. To really wrap our heads around this, we actually need to rewind a bit to the philosopher John Locke. He championed this concept of natural rights and identified three core pillars: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. Now, what's crucial to understand here is that Locke considered these rights to be absolute, meaning no state, no government, and no individual gave these to us. We have them simply because we are human. And because no one gave them to us, guess what? No one has the right to take them back. Which brings us to this incredibly powerful idea of inalienable rights. Think about a tree for a second. You can't strip a tree of its right to grow leaves, flowers, and fruits without fundamentally destroying the tree itself, right? Well, in that exact same way, you cannot separate a human being from these natural rights without ending their existence as a dignified person. It's a biological and sociological necessity. All right, so we've got those powerful philosophical origins, but how did the modern world actually organize these ideas after all the chaos of the early 20th century? Let's look at Section 2, the Universal Declaration. December 10th, 1948. Mark that down, because it literally changed the world. On this day, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR. We actually still observe this exact date every single year as International Human Rights Day. It was this massive moment when the globe collectively agreed on a baseline for human dignity. The UDHR is incredibly comprehensive. We're talking a preamble and 30 articles covering a huge spectrum of civil, political, cultural, and economic rights. But, and this is a massive caveat, the UDHR is not legally binding on countries. You're not going to get arrested simply for violating it. Instead, it serves as the ultimate source of human rights globally. It's an assumed standard that any democratic country should really aspire to adopt into its own laws. So how do we bridge that gap between these big global ideals and our local reality? That's what we'll uncover in Section 3, as we explore what fundamental rights actually are. It is absolutely crucial to distinguish between human rights and fundamental rights. Human rights are those broad, assumed global standards we just talked about, the ones that aren't strictly legally binding on their own. Fundamental rights, on the other hand, are the broad human rights that a country has actively chosen to legally guarantee. Specifically, in the context we're looking at today, fundamental rights are the human rights that have been explicitly incorporated into Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. It's kind of like a golden rule. All fundamental rights are human rights, but all human rights are not fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are simply the specific, localized, legally actionable subset of that much broader global human rights umbrella. It's a great aha moment that completely clarifies how the two concepts stack up against each other. Moving right along to Section 4, let's talk about the nature of these rules. Now that we know what fundamental rights are, how do they actually function to protect you in the real world? There are two massive takeaways here about Part 3. First up, they are enforceable or justiciable. This means they aren't just polite suggestions. If your right is violated, you have the direct power to march right up to the courts, even the Supreme Court, to demand enforcement. Second, they mostly act as negative obligations on the state. This is so important. It means they're explicitly worded to tell the government what it cannot do. They act as a hard, legal boundary restricting state power and preventing government overreach. Now, while Part 3 is really the core engine of these enforceable protections, you see reflections of human rights rippling everywhere else in the Constitution, too. The spirit of human rights is beautifully woven right into the preamble, into Part 4, which covers directive principles of state policy, and Part IVA, which outlines fundamental duties. The entire document is just infused with these ideals. Which brings us to our fifth and final section, and honestly, a bit of a plot twist: the limits of freedom. We've talked nonstop about these profound protections, but does that mean your rights are absolute? Can you really just do whatever you want? Here is the absolute crucial point. Fundamental rights are not absolute. No way. They are restricted rights. Think back to the very beginning, where we said rights are essential for social life. Well, an entirely unrestricted society where everyone just does whatever they please doesn't lead to some perfect utopia. It quickly devolves into total chaos and anarchy. Your right to swing your fist ends exactly where my nose begins. So to keep that balance, the Constitution outlines very specific grounds for reasonable restrictions. Now, these aren't punishments, guys. They're guardrails. Your freedoms can be restricted in the interest of the sovereignty, integrity, and security of the country. They can be limited to maintain public order, decency, and morality. We also have restrictions designed to protect the interests of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and weaker sections of society. And of course, you can't use your freedom to commit defamation or contempt of court. It's this incredibly careful, deliberate balancing act between individual liberty and the safety of everyone else. Man, what an incredible journey we just took. We started all the way back with John Locke's abstract natural concepts of life, liberty, and property. We saw those ideas codified globally by the UN in 1948. We learned how nations pull from those broad assumptions to create highly specific, legally enforceable fundamental rights. And finally, we saw exactly how those rights must be carefully balanced with reasonable restrictions so we maintain a dignified, orderly society. So I want to leave you with a question to chew on today. Knowing that absolute freedom equals chaos, how will you balance your fundamental rights with your responsibilities? Because understanding your rights is super empowering, but understanding the boundaries that actually keep our society functioning, well, that's true wisdom. I really hope this gave you a brand new perspective on the legal framework that shapes your everyday life. If you enjoyed this explainer, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.